I'm Kelsey Moser, and you're watching Thorin's YouTube channel, where no sandbagging goes unscrutinized.
Right, this is another episode of Talk to Thorin. My guest for this one is going to be Jensen Goh, who people might have seen on a number of my talk shows in the past. He is someone who works as a coach, or does he? That's what we'll find out during the interview. And he's done a whole bunch of other things. He's an analyst, someone who watches the game, a thinker, etc. So where I want to start, Jensen Goh, is you obviously come out of the Southeast Asian scene of League of Legends. Spoiler, when people hear you talk, they're immediately going to recognise the twang of the accent. Now, in this capacity, I want to know this first of all. You did actually start out coaching within that region and working with some smaller teams, etc. How would you frame that sort of era of your career?
Well, it's how would I frame it? That's a very interesting way to put it. I think it's a very experimental phase. When people ask me how do you get into coaching, I always tell them it's a lot about being in the right place at the right time. And I think that this was when Riot was starting to recognize coaching as a thing. They were pushing very hard for infrastructure and the team side of things. And I was a caster at a point of time. I started out just helping teams because I was covering the Singaporean teams in the Southeast Asian circuit, and they weren't exactly the best. And I didn't want to just be the caster who's there just criticizing them all the time. So I decided to put my money where my mouth was and actually step in there and be a sixth pair of eyes for the team, right? And back then I would even joke about it that you shouldn't call me a coach, because a coach is a very institutionalized position. So I was never really coaching back then, but it was more like,
keep going.
I was more of like assisting these teams and trying to figure out, okay, this is how we piece things together, and this is how we try to copy or replicate some of the ideas that were happening in these foreign countries. And there's a lot of like just mediating between players and all the good jazz as well. But it's because I was working in the Singaporean scene, and Singapore, the cost of living and the cost of operating and maintaining a team is rather high. So we don't really have full-time teams, but we were taking these part-time teams and we were putting up decent results. And we would sometimes regularly beat the full-time teams from the other region in Southeast Asia. Not that I think that any of them are of particular fame at this point of time in that era. But it was good enough for people to start recognizing, hey, okay, there's this Jensen guy, there's this Nelson guy, they're working with these teams here in Singapore. They're part-time teams and they're putting up decent results against the full-time teams, which is supposed to have like 5 times the resources. We would have like 2 scrims a week, right? And we are going up against these full-time teams who are scrimming like multiple blocks every week and things like that. And if we are able to take games off them, if we're able to beat them in the series, back then we considered it a decent accomplishment. So I think that it was actually Lyric, who's currently a LPL shoutcaster, who actually gave both of us a break to bring us over to Taiwan to start coaching at a point of time. But it was very experimental. Back then there was like, what was the idea of a coach? And I think that that's something that over time has evolved quite a fair bit as well. But back then it was basically the Wild West. You were free to interpret it as you choose. Were you just an analyst? Were you somebody with an extra set of eyes? I think these days when people talk about a coach, there's a certain expectation that you have to have a certain set of skills and things like that. Back then, if you were somebody who was providing value to the teams that you were working with, people appreciated you.
By the way, what is your connection to Nelson and how long have you known him? Because obviously in the last few years, he obviously got quite famous because he's done a lot of Western talk shows and said a lot of controversial things, even though the joke is, if you know him, he's not even trying. That's like breathing. He just says that stuff and he just doesn't have a connection. He doesn't have the tact chip in his brain to make him know that might be a bit edgy. He just says it if he thinks it. So you knew this guy all these years back ago?
I mean, I didn't know him outside the League of Legends scene, but basically we recognized that, hey, it's the two of us who are actually bringing value. We are the people who are actively trying to build a scene over here. And we recognized that we were the makers, right, back in Singapore in the Southeast Asian scene. So we decided to collaborate, even though we were basically even though we come from the same country, we come from actually very different worlds. And it's through that collaboration that we started to know each other better. And we then have quite a pretty solid relationship after that. We actually quite we talk to each other, we share ideas all the time and all the kind of things. But at the start, I wouldn't say it was like, oh, it was the two of them and the two of us like loved each other and knew that we were going to have this wonderful friendship many years down the line. In fact, we were rather antagonistic to each other at the start, as what you would imagine from teams, from people working or helping out with rival teams and that kind of things as well. Nelson had a very different approach to a lot of things back then, and as compared to my ideals and my ideas as well. So we didn't necessarily see eye do I. But it's the fact that we recognize that, hey, the esports scene is so small. There's only these people who are able to actively create value and make things better for people, or bring money into the scene, or in whatever way. So that's where we started to collaborate a lot more, and put our differences aside to create better things for everyone else in the community.
When you say Lyric, actually, he's not someone who only popped on my radar when he started commentating the LPL, obviously, which was only a few years ago. So who was this guy all that time ago? I didn't even know he was still around the scene.
It's actually quite a crazy story, right? Because he's an American, and then you're wondering, what is this guy going and coaching and coaching in Taiwan? And if you follow his Twitter and things like that, you would see that he actually releases and does all sorts of music and kind of things as well.
Oh, okay.
So there was this team back in the LMS, it was called Machi, and it was actually owned by I believe it's an American Taiwanese rapper. And then that was the common connection that they had. So they knew each other through the music industry, and then I think Lyric made some posts about the LMS and things like that on Reddit, and
Right.
the owner of Machi saw that and was like, hey, okay, you know something about League of Legends, let me bring you on. And then that's how he got his break into the LMS. He's been always like a very nomadic sort of person, always very willing to travel to foreign countries, and he went in there, he took that break, and then he started out coaching in Taiwan as well. And I think that because he saw that value in people who were willing to expand their horizons and move to other countries to try things out, people who had the appetite for risk or adventure, I think that's maybe why he was more keen on bringing on Nelson and I, rather than trying to look for other Taiwanese coaches at a point of time.
Now, obviously, as you say, like the scene itself, like the teams within it, etc., especially at the semi-amateur level, there's no money whatsoever. And I've heard one of the things that shocked me, I know it happened recently now, so it looks bad, but they're about 5 years too late. The reason I told everyone, just sign the bloody Flash Wolves players, is I already knew they could speak basic English. And more importantly, they were getting paid fuck all. Like, the amount was ridiculous compared to what they'd have gotten in any LCS team, any LEC team. Like, these teams should all have, years ago, known this. So one thing I want to ask about is you coached in the LMS early on in your career. And when I looked across all the names, I saw a name that everyone now should know. You'd have seen him at MSIs. It was obviously Mission, the mid laner. And he's a guy who since has gone on to become a PCS champion, played many, many, many years. Who was this guy?
Mission was kind of the veteran. He was the leader on the team at a point of time. So what I had was it was Mission and Nino, who was I inherited them for, they were the core solo laners from the Machi team previously, and they're brought into this team. And this was actually sort of it's an unspoken thing. I think this many years later, I can kind of say it, right? It's like there was like HKA, and then we're effectively the B team of HKA, even though B teams were not allowed at the point of time.
Okay,
right?
there you go.
Yeah, I mean it was bad. We were literally living in the basement of the house, and then when they realized that, oh wait, there's this door that opens into the basement, and is there another esports team down there? Then that's when people started realizing, okay, maybe this is a little bit too obvious, right? But that's something that's happened many years ago, and I think the Mission was always he was always a captain. He was always a leader. I met up with him recently, and I asked him that you have been playing this game for this many years now. I said, when was the last time you dreamt about League of Legends? And he looked at me and he laughed and said, I just dreamt about it last night, right? I think he's someone who eats, sleeps, and breathes League of Legends. But this is someone who I think has, I would say, is a specialist of sorts. And he's someone who gave me a lot of insight into what it meant to be a competent pro player. And through my work with him as well, also let me understand, okay, what's kind of like the gap between the truly elite top level pro players and somebody who is very good and very efficient, right? I'm not saying the Mission is a bad player, but the difference embodies itself over here, because he's somebody who is very infamous for having a rather limited or smaller champion pool. They call him the king of Azir and Corki in the PCS. Back then it was called the LMS, and back then he was known for only being able to play Kassadin, right? And then he was able to pick up Azir and Syndra and a few of those champions as well. But the assassins always kind of eluded him. And then you would compare that to when we would scrim all these foreign teams, and we would see that, okay, they are able to like innovate and pick up things within the meta, whereas we had to work around a more specific thing. But because he was such a vocal, talismanic captain of sorts, he was able to coordinate the team and to play around his strengths as well. And we would know that, okay, this is what we needed. We needed some form of mid-prio. Back then, that was in Season 7, so it was a lot about, it was inheriting the Season 6 Worlds meta, where it's about playing double-range bot lanes, and if you were able to get prio in the bot lane, if your mid and jungle were then able to enforce that, you can then create this flowchart style of League of Legends that I was trying to bring forward with them, where they would then be able to enforce those leads. So it was very helpful as a debuting coach to have somebody like Mission who was already a leadership factor, a very strong team captain, and he understood that, okay, when I drew out the flow chart on the whiteboard one day in the center of our practice room, when I saw him taking pictures of it, I knew that, okay, this is something that it definitely clicked with them. And not only did it click with them, Mission was somebody who would be there and he would play enforcer as well, right? So it's not just me who has to go and call the players. Okay, we're not following the flow chart over here. If somebody said, okay, this is what the flow chart says, why aren't you guys following this, right? So it was very helpful to have that captain role in the team, and I think that he's definitely grown a lot as well. At the point of time, my bot lane Unified's another name that I think people have seen on the international stage as well. He was actually previously a mid laner. So when I went in as a coach at a point of time, and because we were effectively the B team, it was a 2-man stuff, right? We don't have this 7-man, 8-man coaching rosters that you see these days with like positional coaches in every position, sometimes multiple positional coaches as well. It was just me and the manager of the team, who would then double up and help me do a little bit of positional coaching, which was basically just holding the players accountable, right? Because if there's a certain plan, there's a certain objective for the jungler to work on, and my effort is on helping Unified, who was previously a mid laner, transition to AD carry position, a lot of my attention and focus would be on the bot lane instead. So I had to prescribe like overall team strategy. I had to go in and do individual coaching as well, do a lot of lane coaching. So if you were to look back at my Twitter, I would always advertise myself as a bot lane specialist lane coach of sorts in my earlier days. Because that's where I really started things out. Started out doing things, and I'm not like a challenger player myself, so I had to go back and watch a lot of tape, and it's just literally just staring at how people spend the mana, just staring at the status bars on the side of the screens and seeing how people spend the mana to try and figure out, okay, this is a general idea that they're playing with, and then break it down into replicatable structures so that they could play and then execute with it. Of course, back then it's a double reach meta, so it's a lot about how do you position, and do you match the AD carry to AD carry? Do you match the AD carry to support to then stay healthy, or do then position accordingly to be able to bully out and get effective chunks on your opponents, right? Because if you did that very effectively, you were able to make more progress on the bot lane turret. You were able to set up for dives on the open bot lane if you played with the right amount of off aggression in the 2v2 in the bot lane at a point of time. So that was kind of what it was like working with Mission and Unified at a point of time.
I saw that you actually, bizarrely, for like 2 months were in a Chinese team, and it was only a few months, but that team actually featured Yagao when he was just a young guy and finally would heard of him. So why were you only there for a couple of months, and who was Yagao?
I don't really have a very fair accurate read at the point of time, right? Because I went in there, it was a trial period team, and Yagao he knew. It was the point of time where Yaka was trailing to go to JDG as well.
Right.
Back then, people knew him as the LeBlanc player, right? LeBlanc and I do not think Zoe was released yet at the point of time, but LeBlanc was what he was most famous for, and he played like 3 champions. He played LeBlanc, he played Lucian, he played Malzahar in the mid lane at a point of time. So we were playing, and back then it was in the off season basically, and we were basically playing the NEST. And then the NAST is basically the all-season tournament for the Chinese teams. And all of these players, they wanted to be... The struggle here was that I was being put on trial in a period where all the players wanted to go on holiday and they wanted to go on break. So there was a little bit of a challenge in my onboarding during the period, and it didn't really work out at a point of time because most of the players, the attitude was, you know what, our mid laner, our star player is going to get sold off to another team, and some of the other guys is like, I'm not sure what's going to happen with me, and there were those who were still willing to work and try, but it was a little bit more of a struggle and mismatch of expectations at a point of time. But Yaka, I would definitely say that he's somebody who, that's where I in the past, you would just say that, okay, these players are making mistakes, and the mistakes are like, you punish a mistake and you get a solo kill, or you are making a mistake and then you get solo killed, right? But Yaka was someone who very consistently was able to play lane above par, and that's where I understood this concept is that, okay, this game is about one way to win a League of Legends is to be able to execute your lane, and back then being able to execute mid lane above par was a very effective way to win the game. So it's about how do you coordinate jungle and support, do you then execute level 1s, do you then be able to enable your mid laner to find these leads. But of course, there was a rather limited champion pool. People banned 2 champions, and then we are stuck on the Malzahar, and the strategy will have to change.
Right. One thing I wanted to ask about was one of the more famous teams you worked with was in Europe with Splyce, when if people remember the time period when they were good, when they had like Vizicachi and Humanoid and Kobbe, that lineup, Cersei. People remember the lineup I'm talking about, Norscare and Tor now, right? I know it just lists you as like assistant coach, and you're working with obviously like the Vipers teams, which is like the Elite Academy one too. What were you actually doing for Splyce itself? Like, was it a positional coach? What kind of role were you playing in this sense? Because you were in Peter Dunn's staff, I'm guessing, right?
So the way that they structured the stuff back then was that they had quite an expensive stuff, expensive with an A, right? So it was a rather large coaching roster, and they're doing positional coaching that will be shared across both teams as well. So I was because back then I advertised myself as a little bit as more of a bot lane coach. That was what I was more of doing for the Splyce side, and then that was where I was doing scouting reports when they were making the run for roles and all these style of things as well. So I was coming in, I was doing those style of things for them, where I would prepare and say that, okay, because I knew that back then the group was FPX, GAM, and J-Team, right? So a team from Vietnam that I coached in the region previously as well. So I kind of knew all the intricacies of those players. I knew that they had like a four-way flex between the players if they really wanted to cause absolute chaos on the international stage. And I kind of like knew like what are the general ideas and philosophies behind these teams as well. J-Team was also from the LMS previously, so I kind of knew that these are things to watch out for as well. But of course, you still have to do the hard work. You still have to go in there, prepare the scouting reports, structure it into what I would say is Peter Dunn's vision of the game, where there are these specific timings that you have to look for particular setups that you're either trying to do, I believe, Rift Herald level 1s and then Baron setup with the three big things that are included in the scouting report. So to say that this is how this team approaches these style of things, and if there are potential weaknesses in it, this is how we can particularly exploit that. Right, so it was very different from what I think a lot of people expect from a scouting report, where this is like how often people ward in these style positions. It's very detailed. It's about this is the thing that we think that based on Peter Dunn's vision of the game that these people are doing wrong, and this is how we can then exploit it. Right, so they can translate it directly to, if you see this, you can execute this in game itself.
I don't know if people know, like they understand Mac came under Peter Dunn, or even then some people think he just replaced him. He was actually one of his like people who's a coach. But another one was obviously Duke, the French guy, if people know, who also coached in the LEC, etc. Question I have is, do you actually consider yourself a protege of Peter Dunn? Do you have some things from his vision that you've added to your game?
Oh, definitely. I would say that 1 year that I spent on Splyce, I learned so much from Peter Dunn. In terms of like, I was already very subscribed, right? Even in my debut season as a coach with this idea of Flowchart League of Legends and working with Peter Dunn, I would say hopefully maybe that structure was something that he was able to get something out of, but I got a lot out of him in terms of like these are the holes in my map in terms of my understanding of the game, and looking at the way that they played with the Splyce roster, it helped me understand this is how you play from behind, right? Because if you look at Season 7 League of Legends and you progress to Season 8, Season 9, it was Season 7 was a lot about snowballing elite. So a lot of the times when my solution to, okay, what happens if you fall behind? The answer was don't fall behind in the first place, right? And especially when you play against Flash Wolves and things like that, where once you get a hit, you feel that the pressure is just on your throat all the way, because that's the domestic competition you're playing against in the LMS, where they're just stepping on your throat 24/7 because you're always getting the reset in before you. They will always be in the mid diamond, that's what I call it, always before you, and you're always going to be one step behind them on the play. So, when I worked with Peter Dunn, that Splyce team was very notorious for dragging games out 40 minutes and 50 minutes and winning the games with the superior scaling, right? They call it Peter Dunn time at a point. And what I learned was, okay, if you fall behind, these are the things you can do to stay in the game, right? And people would always criticize that this Splyce team was always missing opportunities, but I saw the way that Peter Dunn, what he did was, which was very influential to me as a coach as well, is that he built a very clear floor in terms of execution, where he gave the players a way to know that to anchor themselves to say that, okay, regardless of the situation in the game, no matter how chaotic, no matter how messy, no matter how awful it feels, if we do these things, we're not going to lose the game, right? And as long as we're not losing the game, we will eventually find opportunities to win it. So that resulted in the whole thing where people are always asking, okay, why are the Splyce players resetting all the time? Why are they always so slow to close out the games? Because that is their first instinct, right? We are going to start by making sure that we don't lose the game, and eventually a good opportunity will come up for us to win it. And of course, to draw a football analogy of sorts is it kind of inverts later on, but I think it was Alex Ferguson who said it, was that offense wins you games, but defense wins you championships, right? I kind of say in League of Legends it's a little bit of the other way around, but definitely playing towards scaling, and if you're able to equip a team with this ability to be able to grind things out and extend the game, you will then be able to win games from situations where it really seems very tough to close out from.
So, okay, if you were working with the bot lane, tell me about Kobbe, because this was obviously one of the splits where people started to really realise he was a top player and he got some hype again.
I think that a lot of what I was doing was a carryover from what I was doing with Unified and Skull from my days working with the Vietnamese teams. Working with the Taiwanese teams and then later the Vietnamese teams. It's just about how do you structure understanding of how to play 2v2s, right? Back then, Zyra Khan was it was Zyra Khan versus Kai'Sa Nautilus meta. It was basically some form of Zyra versus Kai'Sa, right? And it's about understanding that the way I structured it is that there's 3 ways to play the lane. You can play it as the poke side of things, you can play as the all-in side of things, or you can play as you're playing defense, and depending on how you structure it. So that was the way that I presented it to them. And Kobbe was someone who I think that not only him, but the Splyce Vipers bot lane, which was Freeze and Prime as well, what they struggled with was the AD carry. They didn't really know how to present their ideas as to how to play how they wanted to play the lane out to the support. So they never really were on the same page. So what I was actually more of doing was trying to create common language for them to figure out, okay, this is how I want to play, and this is how I can better communicate this with my support and create a common framework in which that we can then decide, okay, should we be playing aggressive at this point of time? Should we not be looking for this trade at this point of time in relation to the jungle as well, or whatever is the overarching game plan that they have that the draft affords them? So I think that being able to provide the framework for Kobbe and Thorin was something that helped them quite a fair bit. I think that it was very useful to them because I think that both of them were more soft-spoken personalities to a certain degree, and it helped them bridge that the communication gap between them.
Right. Also, after this, you coached in PCS. So in theory, like, it's not technically your region, but sort of your home region, right? What was this experience like?
So going back to the PCS in 2020, right?
Yeah.
That was working with Resurgence. So this was the middle of COVID, where I actually did a YouTube video about this, where it was probably one of the worst splits I've ever had, where I was put into a team of Singaporeans. So it's me returning to my home country, and then working with the players that I worked with, who I used to work with in basically tier 2, tier 3 at a point of time. And I was taking over in the summer split after my stints with the Australian team. And it was a very tough challenge, right? If you look at the players like River and Maple and Gory, and you look at the level they're performing at on the international stage, and I was basically playing with a bunch of players who this is effectively their first year playing competitively, right? We had a few players from Hong Kong who had played competitively before, but it was a very tall task to be able to prepare this team culturally, to help them have the right mindset of this is how a team environment works and the team culture works. So I think that this spills over to some of the challenges that the West has as well, because in Singapore, all these players have played under the amateur system for so long, where there's no proper structure, there's no proper coaching, and for a lot of them, it's a lot about it's just being on the top team requires you to have some guile in terms of like playing player politics. And what usually happens is that the more outspoken players, those who are more willing to throw their teammates under the bus after a major regional loss or international loss, they would then continue to be able to build the teams around themselves. So that aversion towards conflict, that aversion towards willingness to speak up to admit wrongdoings and things like that was a very big thing that I didn't really have the time to work through with them. So as a coach, I had to go in there and prescribe them the strategy, teach them how to do the individual things, and help them navigate this team culture as well. I mean, there was a lot of things that went wrong with the team, but I would say that the fundamental challenge over there is in terms of setting the right team culture so that these players will be able to be more autonomous in terms of solving their problems with each other as well, rather than having to rely on a coach to do everything for them.
Now, I know that one thing that's interesting is when you worked recently with the Maryland University, you worked with all the collegiate teams, you actually had one of the players that people will know from his time in the LCS. But the funny thing is, he's somewhat of an infamous figure because every fan, for some reason, what this guy cut from the team. And that's, of course, Niles. Now, if people don't know, it's not just that like he had some splits that looked dodgy. And quite frankly, I know some people who actually think there was like more to his game and he didn't always get shown in the league, etc. But I know he's also someone where like I think he didn't want to be a pro or something and he actually wanted to go like back to college, and there's other reasons why, like it doesn't fit the modern culture of esports, you could maybe say, in that sense. It's the most polite way to say it. Seems like a pretty cool guy to me. Who was this guy and what was it like to work with? Because obviously usually at collegiate you're not going to get someone of that level. You're going to essentially be an amateur, right?
I think Niles is amazing as a player, as a team captain, right? And as a human being as well, because he's somebody who how where should I start with this? Because I think that his experience in pro was basically being thrown into the deep end, right? They basically took two players from Collegiate and then put them onto the LCS stage. There was Niles, there was I believe it was called Iconic, right? Niles and Iconic back then when they played in the LCS, yes. And it was a very tough struggle for them. But my experience working with him showed that this is somebody who understands the modern game as I see it, right? He understands that this is how you play the map. It's a little bit like Whipple, where they have the ability to execute in lane and they're eloquent enough to expound on their ideas as to this is how the matchup is supposed to go. And it's all about coordinating the plays towards it as well. And similar to what Mission did for me on Fireball, this is someone who also knows how to play disciplinarian and is able to step up and call his teammates out and say, "Hey, okay, what you're doing here isn't the right thing. This is what we agreed on. Why aren't we necessarily doing that?" And he was definitely someone who was in the set on the team. And I think not only was there Niles, there was also APA, who was I think one of the rising stars for the people who are following the tier 2 scene as well. That combination of solo laners was definitely something that I enjoyed working with a lot, because there was two people who really bought in and understood my vision and ideas of the game, which is to play this LPL style of map control, where it's a lot more about playing these two-lane pick comps, where we were very open to playing the likes of Renekton and Lily and being willing to say, okay, we're going to end the game in 18 minutes, regardless of who the opposition is. And it was actually, and that mid-game movement that we were able to execute, we actually got some scrimmages against LCS teams at the point of time, and we were able to take games off of them as well. So it was definitely working out for us, and I would have to say that Niles' vision of the game and his ability to coordinate that is something that I think is a shame that he didn't get more time in the LCS, or he didn't get a roster that would be able to let him do that, right? And of course, when you're a rookie as well, you have to listen to the other people on the team, and you lose a lot of that voice that actually lets you represent that, okay, these are the ideas that I want, this is how I want to play things out.
Right. I saw you also did work with the Immortals Academy team. So my question goes like this. Is there a reason in LEC or LCS you haven't actually had like a head coach offer or job? Maybe you have had offers. Were you in the mix for them? Did you just not get your profile up enough? Why have you never gotten the head coach job?
I don't really know. I think that a lot of people, they see me more as somebody who supplements strategic ideas, someone who supplements tactical ideas. And I would have to say that putting me in a developmental position is something that I excel in as well, to be able to create structure and provide things for people to deal with. Because I know that my strength, like I said, the thing that I really struggled the most with is culture, right? And at a head coaching position, I would have to say when you're dealing with the top elite level pro players, say maybe for a top team or something like that, you kind of have to be very strong at implementing that culture as well. Not to say that I'm bad at doing it, but I think that the optics of how people see me is that they see me more of an analyst, they see me more of someone who's smart about the game and is able to provide certain things in terms of development or teaching players particular tactics. And I would say that that's probably what I'm best known for people who have worked with me, is Jensen's system as to this, I would even say, flowchart, maybe even rigid approach of playing the game. So as to why I haven't gotten a head coaching opportunity, I'm not all too sure for a major region. Maybe it's because of visa issues or other things like that as well. That's something that I probably have to ask other people as well, you know.
Right, as you've mentioned already, and something on my shows that you always bring up is you like to model the game, at least in the modern day, as the difference between teams that do the map control style, which you just said is your preference, and then there is the teams that essentially, I think the other one was like farming and scaling. Is that correct? Was that the other approach?
Goal efficiency.
Efficiency, right? So essentially, similar concept, by the way, but yeah, you just say it a different way, right? Contrast the two for me and explain why you prefer the map control style.
So to break it down, is about what are the core axioms that each philosophy approaches, right? So for the map control style, it's about how do we have lots of agency, and the core axiom is that if I bring 5 people to a fight and you bring 4 people to a fight, the 5 is going to beat the 4, right? So if I'm going to be able to control the map to create numerical advantages, through champions with high agency, and champions with the ability to then find and force these fights, this is going to be a style that's very effective at playing the game. Whereas the other style, it's a lot more about finding, okay, if this game is going to come down to 5v5 fights around Baron, or even in some situations, if I'm going to fight against you 4 against 5, if the overall goal efficiency of my team is higher than your goal efficiency, by virtue of that, I'm going to win a team fight. And I would say that these are the two core differences in ideas behind the game. So this manifests itself in the way that the teams play the game, where you will notice that the team that's playing for the map control style is playing to defend the wave that's spawning out of the base. So the way that they reset, the way that they walk on the map, you'll see them walking to escort the minion wave so that the opponents don't get to clear it for free, and they force a response for the opponent in the minion wave in the right position to then create a rotation where they know that they can create a numerical advantage. Whereas the goal efficiency style, you would see a lot more 1-2-2s, a lot more 1-3-1s, where they're not walking out to defend the wave, they're walking out to catch the wave instead, so that they're able to distribute farm across the map, right? Where things like Chovy TPing on the wave to be able to push the extra wave to then get the extra wave of farm for himself, is part of that idea as well.
Right. A couple of areas, if people don't know that, they can find out more about your style, your thoughts, is one, you actually wrote a book. It was like a self-published one, but it has a bunch of like both anecdotes and stories of teams you coached, and then also some ideas about the game and certain things about being a pro gamer and stuff, right? If people are interested in this, give us like a brief overview, and then how would they get it if they still wanted to get this book? Is it available still?
Yeah, I mean, you can reach out to me on Twitter. I still have a few copies that I can send out to you. I mean, at this point of time, I'm just happy to give it out. If shipping is covered and things like that. But yeah, the contents of the book tells a little bit more about my story about it's titled From Amateur to Pro, the Esports Pursuit of Mastery, and it talks about how do you manage this transition from an amateur player to a pro player, right? I would say that back then when I wrote it in 2019 and 2020, it was a lot more topical about more applicable to this idea of how do you get into esports, right? What does it mean to snowball the talents and the skills that you have into these areas? And it gave a little bit of overview of some of the implementations that I use in my coaching career, be it, say, the player journal, as a means of reflecting on what's happening, of collecting data as well, to figure out, okay, these are the things that we can do better in the future, and some of my stories as well in terms of my growth as a person in this journey, being a coach.
Another thing, if people, because actually I always hear this, I get asked this because obviously I'm someone who likes to like know as much as I can about the game and the people in it, etc. A lot of people actually, I mean, I won't say a lot. Here's the thing. I think most people who watch streams, it's kind of like to be cool. They pretend they want to know about the deep tactics and the shot calling and the draft thing. But really, that's just what they use to talk about the game. Like they want, really their opinion is like, I like this player, so put him on that champion. But they'll say it like, why didn't the draft coach that? The coach draft that? They should have done this, whatever. But a lot of it's quite surface level. I don't know how many people really want to go deeper, but you do occasionally get the people who are like, I actually want to know like more specifics on like what are the setups here and how the team's playing. And I always say the problem is even some of the people who actually are brilliant at that stuff, they don't actually do it on camera very much. Even on camera, they're just sort of like reacting or making it entertaining. It's more about entertainment, I would say. So what I oftentimes have people say, like, where is it you can go if you're like a hardcore fan? And one thing I've told people is actually if they check out your Patreon, on your Patreon, you do actually like breakdowns of specific games, and you do like was it like an Excel sheet or a document or something? You do like a whole thing explaining like what your approach was. So can you give me some thoughts on this and like give me some, what else does your Patreon offer?
So this actually started as a means of simplifying and reducing the amount of time that players need to spend watching a VOD, right? I mean, most of the days when people say, "Oh, I watched the VOD" and things like that, they just have it on the side and watch and okay, this is a
Yeah.
team fight, this wasn't carried and things like that. That's very surface level. So what I tried to do was to break down the essences of these sort of things to then present it in a way where it forces the players to think about what is it that this player is seeing and what is this player trying to achieve in these positions, right? So it started out. I was very inspired by the chess puzzles during the pandemic, and there was like a whole
Right.
chess boom and things like that. So I would be able to take these screenshots and like ask a series of questions and say, that, okay, from here, what's the next play going to be? And then I realized that if I actually capitalize on this more, it actually saves players so much time in terms of having to watch through a VOD to figure out, okay, these are the things that I should be looking out for by just presenting it to them. This is a team fight that was taken very well by JDG, right? And this is how Ruler played Kaisa. So this was the latest one that I did. So this is how Ruler played Kaisa, right? So let's try to reverse engineer a little bit as to what his thought process is like in terms of playing Kaisa. And I provide you the possible structures in which that you can use for it. And then if as a player you're trying to say, okay, I'm trying to learn how to team fight Kaiser better, you look at the structures and then you look at the situation, and it gives you a form of very deliberate, very distilled version of I'm just looking at this and conceptualizing how I'm supposed to play out the team fight in the future, so that you're not going in pressing R too early and completely entering the team fight, and you can do a better job at replicating what Ruler does, right? And this is I would say this is kind of like the essence of what my coaching has been a lot about, at least on the tactical level, which is about breaking down complicated ideas and complicated structures into bite-sized things that people can digest and easily understand, right? And this is something that even if you are a silver player or a gold player, if you look at this and you do the worksheets and things like that, it will definitely give you a better understanding of the game as well.
And what else can they get? They can ask you questions and stuff, I'm assuming.
Yeah, of course. You can always reach out to me and ask me, and I will always publish the answers. I would always publish the answers, and if you want to know more about why there's a particular reasoning or why is there a particular structure to certain things, you can always reach out to me, and I'm always happy to explain.
Right. Obviously, one reason why I wanted to do this interview is you are looking for work at the moment. You would actually like to be a coach again in League of Legends. First of all, maybe you can tell us, what is your status? Like, can you go to all the other regions? Is there a specific region you would prefer? What sort of team are you looking for? Give us the pitch.
I'm available for work anywhere in the world at this point of time. But here's the pitch, right? If you are a top team trying to go to an international tournament, what I can provide for you is tactical acumen, right? You can bring me on as a consultant in the same capacity that Peter Dunn did when I was helping out the Splyce Vipers. I will come in, I'll give you guys the scouting reports, I'll give you guys the way to structure a practice so that you can level up your game to a certain degree to adapt to what's happening on the international scenes, be it through my VOD review worksheets or whatsoever. Or if you're, say, a mid-table team and you're looking for something longer term, this is something that I learned a lot from Peter Dunn as well, where it's about how do you plan for a longer term plan, right? If you want someone who can build to say that this is what the organization wants to be in 3 years, I am someone who has basically done the gamut of it all, right? I've been to Worlds with Splice. I've made international tournaments multiple times with minor regions, a few times with Australia, with Vietnam, and I'm someone who understands what it means to make it there, and I've also done the tour in the developmental scene, even working with a collegiate scene to talk about this is how you effectively develop players. I work with an academy team as well. I know what the struggles of these things are like. So if you want someone with the insight, and you're a mid-table team trying to piece together something, you want someone who's very strong on the structure elements of things. You want someone who's very good at, say, creating structures with which that we can then collect data for a 3-year plan. I'm the man to do it.
At the end of this interview, do you have like a final message? You want to thank anyone or say hello to anyone?
I'm just gonna start by thanking Rick and Nelson for helping me out so much in my career so far, and of course to you for giving me this opportunity to talk to you and pitch myself.
Okay. How do you actually say it in Singaporean? Is it like share? Is it similar concept?
Oh, we speak English here, so I mean the national
Thank
language.
You, then. Yeah, thanks then, mate. As Mary J. Blige said in her track, All I Need, You're all I need to get by, which is the case for me and my Patreon community who support this channel and these videos. Some of them include Theogony, Matt Pugnatio Rajcula, Ahmed Hadjou, Joseph Adcock, Tosh, Bot Pounder 420, Thooorin, Animosity, Tobias Bernasconi, Jensen Goh, Yurka, and a special thanks always to the main man, Jerky's Minion. Would you like to ask a question in my regular video AMA? Do you want teasers? Find out who upcoming guests are. Maybe you want to suggest a topic or a guest for my content, or you want to take part in one of those longer esports discussions with me where we go all over the place. Well, if any of those grab your fancy, put your money where your mouth is. Join the Risk Illuminati today via the Patreon link in the description box below.